Welcome to a bonus episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. I'm a retired agent on a mission to show you who the FBI is and what the FBI does through my books, my blog, and my podcast case reviews with former colleagues. This is a recording of my live Zoom meetup with members of my FBI True Crime Fiction Reader team. On October 29th, 2020, I had a blast hanging out with Reader Team members and discussing how the FBI is portrayed in books, TV, and movies. Also in attendance were several retired and former agents who have been on the podcast or will be guests on FBI Retired Case File Review in the near future. With their assistance, I answered lots of questions about FBI policies and procedures for those writing stories with FBI characters. It was a fun time with lively conversations about whether writers had a responsibility to get the FBI right in their stories and what limits to creative compromises, if any, should be made. If you weren't able to attend, we missed you. Please enjoy the audio replay. And if you're listening to this because you are in the middle of NaNoWriMo, National Novel Writing Month, I want to wish you good luck with the challenge and good writing. Of course, I want to welcome new listeners and invite you to join my reader team. This podcast is all about true crime, but if you're also interested in crime fiction, once a month via my monthly email, I keep you up to date on the FBI in books, TV, and movies. When you join my reader team, you get access to my FBI reading resource, which is a colorful list of more than 50 books about the FBI written by the FBI agents who have been guests on this podcast. There's nonfiction, crime fiction, true crime, and memoir. You can join my reader team on my website or use the link in your podcast app's description of this episode. I want to thank you for your support. Now here's the show.
Let's get this party started. So what I wanted to do today, I know that my podcast is listened by really three different groups of people. You have people who are just interested in true crime, who love listening to stories about crimes and things that occurred. That's probably maybe the major group of people that are listening to the podcast. But then we have two other distinct groups of people who are FBI agents, current and retired, and people who want to become FBI agents is one group. And then the third group, the last group, which I think is probably the second group, as far as people who participate, are people who are interested in the FBI because they write crime stories or newspaper articles or, nonfiction books about the FBI. And I know for a fact that the podcast is a wealth of information about how the FBI works, who the FBI is and what the FBI does. As you know, that's my motto and my mission. And so today we're going to be answering questions, whatever questions you have about the FBI. But because it is just a few days before the start of NaNoWriMo, and for those of you who don't write, NaNoWriMo is National Novel Writing Month. It's a challenge that's been going on for many years. And during the month of November, it's a challenge to write 50,000 words, which is almost a full book. Most books are about 80 or 90,000 words in a month. I mean, I call myself having tried it twice, but I knew that I wasn't going to be able to write every day in order to get 50,000 words. But one of the things that happens when you're writing and you're doing that is that you're just writing. You're just trying to get the words out. So you may not have time to research and check your facts. And so I thought, well, maybe I could jump in a few days before National Novel Writing Month, give some facts. And so those people who are going to do the challenge will have that information already and won't have to take the time during their 30-day writing sprint to start doing research because, once you get down the research rabbit hole, then sometimes you never get back. And so that was my main motivation to be here today. But of course, we're going to also answer any questions that you have that may not even have anything to do with crime writing. And I want to introduce with me today some of the retired agents who have been on my podcast or will be coming on my podcast, who are also here because they themselves are their own subject matter experts. And although I claim to have a wide knowledge about the FBI based on the fact that I was the spokesperson for the Philadelphia office for 5 years and had to learn about all the different violations and all the different cases that were going on. And also because, I've been the host of a podcast where I've been able to talk to and learn from all of these agents who've worked all the violations. But the people that are also here on the podcast, well, I guess it is a podcast when I turn it into one, but on the video today are also experts in their particular field. And so I want to make sure I introduce them. And I'm just going to name them. And then I'd love for them to come on and just give us a really quick, just 3 or 4 sentences of, what you did in the FBI in your episode number, because I hope you have it, because I forgot to look it up before we came on today. So, well, I know that Kevin Rust is here, and I've interviewed Kevin twice already. I'm going to interview him again. Kevin, would you like to say hello? Just have to push the unmute button. Well, while we're waiting for Kevin, you have to forfeit your turn right now. We're going to go to Michael Anderson. And Michael's been on twice too.
Hi, Jerry. Good morning, everyone. I was actually on 2 different times. The first time I was episode, I believe it was 129, where I talked about the Enron case. It was a 5-year investigation into the failure of the 7th largest company in America. And then the second time, I believe I was episode number 180, where I talked about a case I had when I was first in the FBI in Austin, Texas. And it was a Ponzi scheme, money laundering, passport fraud, and murder for hire investigation. And it was a very, very interesting investigation for me just because it encompassed so much information and so many different things into one case.
Thank you. Stacey, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. I haven't been on the podcast yet. That will be coming. But I worked crimes against children for most of my career with the Bureau. And I actually set off the child abduction rapid deployment team. I started that from FBI headquarters back in 2005. So I am currently finished my first manuscript, looking for a literary agent, if you know anyone. And that's me.
All right, Kevin, you're up.
I was on 2 podcasts, both of them concerning civil rights investigations. One of them was a civil rights murder from back in 1966, and another was actually kind of in the news right now, police brutality investigation. And I'm going to be doing one in a couple weeks, I guess, with Jerry on the WorldCom investigation, which I was actually the case agent on for about a month before I went to New York. But pretty much over by that point. Looking forward to that.
All right. And I see Melissa there. Melissa just did an episode with me that was very popular.
My name's Melissa Osborne. I actually worked in Kansas City field office. I worked healthcare fraud and other white collar crimes. My big case and my podcast was on the pharmacist in Kansas City who diluted cancer drugs for patients, affected over 4,000 patients. I'm actually a pharmacist as well. So I've actually gone back to being a pharmacist. And this case stays very close to me. I know you were talking about the 50,000 words for this month. I'm writing a book on my perspective as being a pharmacist and an FBI agent who investigated this horrible, horrible monster of a man who practiced pharmacy. And I hope to get it finished by the end of November. So I'm happy to be here and maybe I'll learn a few things from you guys.
Great. And Tom?
Yeah, I'm Tom Agori. I run XG Boys for 3,600 mostly retired agents and send out 15 or 20 emails a day to the list, all open source information concerning the FBI. And it's very, very popular with the ex-agent. And I was basically a supervisor back in headquarters, and I worked a lot of cases. I ended up in the Tucson senior resident agent for 4 years.
Tom has not been on the podcast. I've asked him but he hasn't been on the podcast yet. But as he said, he is the organizer of kind of collates stories and things about the FBI and sends it out every single day. So, it's a way for me to keep up what's going on with the Bureau. If anybody has listened to the latest episode, which is, wow, it's about interviewing pedophiles. If you've listened to that episode, which just came out last night, at least 3 times, my guest, Jim Kyle, mentions Ken Lanning. Ken was in and I'm giving you an introduction because you deserve an introduction from me, but Ken was in the original behavioral science unit, working child exploitation cases, chasing those serial killers that we talk about. He is the man. And the episode that I did with him, Ken, do you remember what episode it was?
165.
165. The interview had a sexy title with satanic cults and, child molesters having to do that. But the second part of the title of the interview was
Confirmation bias.
Thank you. Confirmation bias. And I love that part of the episode even more because, today with divisiveness in our society, to learn about confirmation bias was like, wow, eye-opening for me. And I actually said in this episode that I put out last night that I would really encourage people, just before the election to listen to that episode. So that was my introduction for you, Ken. But what else would you like to say?
Yeah, I was an agent for 30 years from 1970 to 2000. And I spent the last 20 of those years in what I'll just call the behavioral science unit, although the Bureau kept changing the name of it. That was longer than any other agent that I know of who was in the unit. And I basically developed the program there and spent all that time and trained a lot of people dealing with crimes against children, particularly sexual victimization of children. The interesting thing is here lately, because I think probably because of this thing, I don't even know how you pronounce it, QAnon, this group that's now claiming that there's a big conspiracy going on where all kinds of powerful people are involved in a satanic cult that's trafficking in children. I've gotten a lot of media requests concerning the work that I did for many years and that I discussed on episode 165 about these hundreds of allegations I dealt with involving sexual victimization of children. So a lot of people seem to now suddenly be interested in something from long ago. But I retired in 2000. I was a consultant for about 15 years, doing consulting work in this area, a lot of civil cases. I also had a contract with the FBI. And then after that, my wife got ill. And so I pretty much retired and took care of her. And she just recently passed away.
Well, I thank you for that. And again, for providing you my condolences. And the other agent that was supposed to be here is Ray Morrow. Ray, are you here? He had the 2-part episode where I had him, he was the undercover agent, and I had the case agent on together, and they did a fabulous podcast episode about the corruption and the Cleveland Police Department. That was so fantastic. I'm going to wait until he comes on to talk about what happened after that episode was posted. But I hope Ray is able to show up. Is there any other retired agent here who'd like to introduce themselves? I think I see everyone.
Hi, good morning. My name is John Rossi. I retired from the Bureau in 2012. And Ken, in 1987, you came to the Navajo Indian Reservation where I was assigned with Blaine McElwain and helped me on one of the larger pedophile cases on the Navajo Indian Reservation near Chinle, Arizona.
Do you remember that, Ken?
I was involved in so many cases that I remember certain details of the cases, but names and specifics kind of faded into my aging memory.
Yeah.
Well, Jim, you haven't been on the podcast yet, so I guess was it Jim Rossi?
John,
I'm sorry, John. Well, see, that's because I don't know you. We got to get you on the podcast. What did you do in the Bureau? What was your specialization, I guess you'd say?
I worked organized crime and drugs like many before 9/11. I was actually held a variety of executive positions. I was Director Mueller's special assistant. I was an inspector. I was the legate in London. I was the assistant director of the old Division 3, which is Administrative Services, now HRD. And I technically retired as the EAD over administration. And then I 5 years to the NFL, and now I live and work outside of Burbank, California.
Okay. Well, you're kind of obligated now to share a case review on the podcast now, because all of these people here are very interested in hearing from you.
That would be fine. Thank you very much.
Is that Simon from New Zealand? And where's your lovely wife?
She's having a sleep at the moment. It's 4 a.m. in the morning here.
Oh, wow. 4 a.m. Well, thank you. Thank you for participating. I know last time you were one of the people that were stuck in the waiting room. And I was, very upset about that because you're coming in from New Zealand. All right, let's get started. Let's see. I did have some that came in on the email. And so I do want to make sure that we go back and forth with questions from participants and questions that people sent in advance. This is from Jenny. And she says that she has in her story an undercover special agent who was drugged without his knowledge, then lured into a villain's sex room where he is filmed naked with cuffs on, that this undercover special agent, is lured into the villain's sex room where he is naked with cuffs on, begging her to do unspecified things to him. He is also caught on film snorting some sort of white powder at her urging. The villain then attempts to blackmail him. It says her premise is that even undercover agents cross the line and that his job is in jeopardy. Or, at the very least, he's pulled from the case if the footage gets out. She wants to know if she's right, how far are you allowed to go undercover, and what would be the reactions of his boss in a situation like this? Well, first of all, when you're undercover, you still have to follow all of the laws in the United States. Just because you're undercover doesn't mean that you can go about breaking laws. And so in this particular situation, if he's lured and drugged, the person who is trying to blackmail him has committed a criminal act. And so I don't think the agent has to be worried about being blackmailed. I mean, once they come to and they realize that something has happened to them, I would hope that they would go back and report that to the bosses. And, it may, I guess one of the issues when they get back to the office is an administrative issue, is that once this undercover agent reveals what has happened to him, it may compromise the case. I mean, the case may be blown because they're going to have to take some type of, criminal legal action against the person who's done this. But I don't think that you can just ignore that somebody has drugged an agent and done, sexually assaulted an agent. Who else would like to weigh in on this?
I'd like to weigh in. I've never worked undercover myself. I've talked to a lot of agents who have, and I've been contacted by many writers about their stories and how accurate they were. But the first thing I say, you're writing fiction or nonfiction. And if you're writing fiction, you can write anything you want. And the thing I find interesting is writers who want certain parts of their story to be accurate, and then they write about other stuff that's totally ridiculous. So I just say, go at it. Is it possible? Yeah, but just make it whatever you want. You're trying to get people interested in the story, and almost anything, I suppose, is possible. So I don't know why they're bound by some certain rules about being accurate, and then they write other stuff that's totally inaccurate, but that's their decision.
I understand what you're saying. I think that there is a balance, and that's really the whole purpose of the work that I'm doing, is to at least the things that you can get right, get them right. The things that you need to make, what we call creative compromises, then you can do that. But I think that in any story, in any subject that you're writing about, you should know, you should have a basic foundation about what you're writing about. And so, yes, you're going to be creative. And, even in my own fiction, I've been creative. I've done some things that I know normally wouldn't happen, in the real FBI. But the foundation is solid. I mean, you wouldn't be writing about, space travel unless you know that you have some of those things right. And, the same thing about whether you're writing about cars or, technology or cyber. I do believe that you have the responsibility to at least learn your subject. And then if you need to deviate, then do so. So I kind of appreciate that people are reaching out and trying to at least get an understanding. Now, if we tell her that, no, that wouldn't happen that way, and she decides to write it anyway, then you're right, go for it. But I do really appreciate the fact that so many people that are listening to the podcast and reading my book, FBI, I got to do the plug, FBI Misconception, a manual for armchair detectives. They're trying their very best to get a good foundation and not make unnecessary deviations, unnecessary mistakes in their writing.
Can I just make
go
a
ahead,
comment?
Melissa?
I actually was case agent over an undercover operation, and I think it almost depends on what time period she's writing. Years ago, it was a little bit more wild, wild west, and maybe the undercover agent was, kind of left out there hanging a little bit more. But when I had my operation, I met daily with my agent. So, I mean, you would think that these days, whoever's the handler or case agent meeting with them and debriefing and that sort of thing would pick up on these weird things, like if they were going down the rabbit hole with drug abuse.
Yeah, I wish Ray was here because, again, Ray, was an undercover agent, and he actually, I think, still goes back to the FBI Academy every now and then to talk about being undercover. So, hopefully he's gonna show up and weigh in. Are there any other retired agents who want to weigh in on this one?
This is Ken Lanigan. The only thing I would say is back to my thoughts about bias. The bias I have is probably the most famous piece of work done about the unit that I worked in, the behavioral science unit, is The Silence of the Lambs, which is essentially a load of garbage. I mean, I don't know where to begin with the inaccuracies. It is at the FBI Academy, some of the filming, but the rest of the story is essentially ridiculous. But Thomas Harris just took a concept and he just let his imagination go wild and wrote a very captivating book, and then turned it into a very interesting movie, but it's not realistic. Unfortunately, many people in the FBI that I knew began to argue about who was based on which character they were in. I wouldn't admit to being any of those characters, but anyway, that's another story.
All right.
I was going to add, when I went undercover posing as a teen in the Crimes Against Children unit, we had something called safeguarding, which I don't know what year that started, but you did have psychological testing to begin with. You had to make sure you weren't too far off the norms when you checked back in with your counselor, with, the whole safeguarding unit. So that was just put in place to make sure, especially with crimes against children cases, when you're seeing the worst that humanity will do to child victims, that you weren't taking that home with you, that you weren't internalizing that you weren't, maybe saving some of that work, getting more engrossed in it than you needed to. There was a lot of checks and balances with that safeguarding unit that I know helped me personally to just check in and say, I'm okay with this right now, but if I'm not in the future, there is someone that I can speak with and deal with any issues that might arise.
To the best of my knowledge, safeguarding for the agents involved in crimes against children began somewhere in the mid to late 1990s. And it was applied both to those working undercover online, as well as those who were spending a lot of time dealing with child pornography and looking at it. Interesting enough, it was first applied to the agents, and then they realized that a lot of the viewing of the child pornography was being done by support personnel, and whether they also should be put under the safeguarding program. I don't know whether that was ever done or not.
Yeah, it was the CART team. They realized, and task force agents as well. So we needed that when we worked those kinds of cases.
All right. Now I'm looking at the chat, and Tom McGorry, one of our participants wanted to know if, your emails and stories were available to the public. And I can answer that and let them know that no, this is again, ex-G boys. And so it's just something that Tom does for retired agents. Let's see what else we have here in the chat. Allison has a question about the importation of hazardous chemicals. Is this solely the domain of customs, or does the FBI play a role? In my story, a professor raises red flags with chemicals he imports, but the investigation is quickly resolved. I'm wondering what red flags would trigger an investigation. Would it be a combination of the chemicals and the country of origin? Well, I can tell you it would be the chemicals. An example of this, of course, after Oklahoma City bombing, one of the things that they started doing was every person that sold explosive chemicals or chemicals that could make explosives, the FBI continuously visits them, and it's almost a self-reporting thing that they do. And also anybody that is involved with any type of infrastructure or business that could possibly have any type of, what's the word I want to use? Well, we have InfraGard, which is a public-private organization that the FBI reaches out to schools, industries, businesses that, could possibly be compromised for any type of terrorist activity. And so when certain chemicals are sold, the FBI is notified. And so if he is importing some type of a hazardous chemical in a quantity that would be suspicious, the FBI and I guess Homeland Security and other organizations would be notified. And so that could be a way that would trigger somebody it wouldn't necessarily trigger investigation, but trigger somebody into looking into that. And Mike, you agree? Okay. So that would be very helpful in that story. The other thing that I wanted to talk about was that there is also weapons of mass destruction coordinators. That person's job is to work with the business community and to know what companies are manufacturing, different equipment, what is being brought in. And this weapons of mass destruction coordinator would probably be the person who would be notified if there was a person that was purchasing a chemical that was suspicious. So you might want to look that up and include that in your story to give it some authenticity. The episode that I think, Allison, you should look at would be the Oklahoma City bombing episode. Also, the episode I did with the bomb tech, Kevin, another Kevin, I can't remember. But if you go to my website, if you put in bomb tech and Oklahoma City bombing, those episodes would come out and they would probably give you some more information that would be very helpful in your story when it comes to, how the FBI is notified of any type of suspicious purchases of chemicals and things like that. Let's see what else we have here on the chat. Can you talk a little bit about new agents and if they are partnered with more senior agents, or do they work on teams? I'll start this one, and then anybody who any other retired agent who wants to participate. Yeah, so when you are a brand new agent and you get to your first field office, you are teamed up with a training agent. But that sounds a lot better than it really is in real life, because your training agent has his own cases or her own cases, and then you have your cases. When you walk in the door as a brand new agent, it's not as if you were doing an apprenticeship and that you're going to be an internship. You could actually have files on your desk that are ready to go. Say you're replacing somebody that just left the squad, or say that the supervisor had cases that had come in and he didn't have anybody available to work them. When you come in that very first day in your brand new office, there are cases on your desk that are assigned to you that you're supposed to do. So yes, you do have a training agent, that person that you can go to ask questions when he or she has an interview that, they need someone to go along with. Hopefully, if they can bring you, maybe they have a case that needs a more experienced agent, but otherwise, they'll take you along in their cases, they'll answer your questions. But you really are expected to hit the ground running as a new agent. So yes, you will be partnered up, but sometimes it could be you and another brand new agent on your squad hitting out to that day to conduct your investigations. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
Yeah. Well, Jerry, I think that the training program has gotten much more rigorous in the field.
Oh, good.
Because I know that, well, even when I came in 1989, we had a training book and your training agent would sign off on your different experiences. But when I came in, nobody ever checked my book. In fact, my training agent took me on 2 interviews and a surveillance and says, hey, if you need anything else, let me know. And, I could check in with him occasionally, but that was the extent of my training agent. But today, at least when I retired 3 years ago, I had the applicant program, and it was much more rigorous. I mean, the books were checked quarterly by the supervisor, by the agent who was responsible for the applicant program. They would check the training book, and it was a mandatory requirement that you had to complete all the different elements within the training book, different types of interviews, different types of cases. You had to be the affiant on, I think, a complaint. You had to help out on a search warrant. I mean, the training, like I say, it was much, much more involved. And I think it was better because it helped round out the agents and ensure they got the experience they needed. Because when I came in, I never worked an FCI case. I never worked a counterterrorism case. I was strictly a criminal guy. But the new agents today, there are different experiences in different areas that they have to at least touch the base and get it signed off on by the training agent. But again, you have to complete everything within the book.
Well, that's good to know because, I was the training agent for a number of agents on my squad, I would say in the late 90s. And I don't remember having that responsibility of having to check anything off. I retired in 2008. And like I said, the last 5 years, I was doing the media, but in the 3 years before that, I was out in a resident agency in the Cherry Hill resident agency. So I didn't have anybody that I was training anymore. But definitely before that, I know I've always been honest that the first 4 years of my FBI career were terrible. I wanted to quit after 4 years. And one of the reasons is because I think I was just floundering and really didn't know what I was doing, where I was going, and had been transferred 3 times in that first 4 years. And, just didn't have a good foundation. So I am glad that the program is more vigorous, but I do think we need to still make the point that the new agents are still expected to be able to hit the ground running. They're still going to have those cases on their desk. I'm pretty sure that hasn't changed. And they're going to be told, go forth and investigate this. I guess the difference is that, the ability to ask for help and to get some guidance is much, much stronger than it was when I came in many, many years ago.
Jerry, I was assigned to an agent in 1963 in Atlanta. We carpooled together, we lunched together, we worked each other's cases together for my first year. And John Reynolds he's still alive. He's in his 90s now. A wonderful agent. He was 10 years older than I was at the time. And I can't tell you how valuable that experience was.
Hey, Jerry.
No, go ahead, Melissa.
I had a great training agent. Of course, I got to Kansas City. And like you said, I had cases waiting the first day I walked in. And his name was Frank Carey. And I don't know if anybody knew Frank Carey. He was kind of all over. But he was wonderful, helped me with a lot of, white collar crime can be somewhat complex. He helped me a lot with that. But I actually did have to do something with pretty much every unit to at least touch it, because white collar crimes are a whole lot different than, violent crimes. But we did have to do a little bit of something. We had to work on wiretaps. We had to do the burglaries. We had to do bank robberies, pretty much everything. So I felt like I got to touch everything. But then, once you settle down in white collar crime, it was that. But I had a really great training agent, and I'm still close to him today. So that's all I wanted to say. I appreciated him a lot.
I'd love to hear from Kevin, because Kevin spent a good part of his career in a resident agency, So what was it like for you, Kevin?
Well, I was in a one-person resident agency for a good chunk of it, so I didn't have any training agents. But
how many years of experience did you have before they gave you that assignment?
4. But I was a 2-person when I came out of Quantico, so that was pretty interesting. But I wanted to comment on something else, which was I was at Quantico at the beginning of my career for training, and then 6 months at the end of my career as an instructor, 30 years apart. And the progress of the FBI training in that 30 years, especially tactical preparation, was pretty impressive. That when I went through in 85, about the same time you did, Jerry, I mean, we did maybe a couple minor practical exercises. We had no idea how to enter a house or anything like that. Whereas now, when they hit the streets, they really do have a good grounding in tactical, how to conduct an arrest, how to conduct a house entry, things like that. And the classroom has also, I think, been refined somewhat, although that hasn't changed as much as and the firearms really hasn't changed at all. The firearms training really was the same 30 years. Firing a weapon doesn't really change that much. But people were asking about the new agent training. It has gotten a lot more rigorous. And I think people are better prepared to do what you were talking about, which, when you hit there, a lot of times sometimes, depending on your on your training agent, you're pretty much on your own. Other times, you've got a lot of support, but you're more prepared based on that training at Quantico. I really felt that way.
Yeah, and I know Mr. Brooks there. Hi, how are you today? Asked the question about training, and the last I heard, it was 21 weeks of training. It was 16 when I came through, but it's 21 weeks of training now at Quantico. And that training with the practical problems that Kevin just talked about, those scenarios where you work out how you would handle an arrest or a search, and you really kind of go through. They actually hire actors from Fredericksburg to come into the academy to work out those problems. And so you do get some excellent training at the academy, so that when you go out into the field, it's not the first time that you've ever participated in an arrest or a search or an interview with an uncooperative subject. All right, let's see. I hope that answered anybody's question that you had about the academy and training. All right, I'm looking at Renee. Renee's question is that she is writing an urban fantasy novella, the day-to-day of an undercover case in which 2 agents, kind of think Mulder and Scully, except not, 2 agents exposed try to hold potentially apocalyptic magical ritual. But I'd like to write this almost in the form of their case notes or a day-to-day journal. How would I go about that? Well, and again, because this is going to be fiction, but as far as case notes and things like that, you can get at least those basics. So whenever an agent does work on a case, there are a number of ways that they record what they do every day. So every interview that's conducted, you have your notes, and the policy was, I guess it still is, that within 5 days, you've got to take your notes and turn them into what is called an FD 302 report of interview. And it's a narrative report. So it's not like you're filling in blanks like you would do a police report. You basically write, from your understanding, from your notes, what you understood the person to say, what they said. And so you could use 302s in your story if you're trying to do this in a form of case notes. Also, when agents conduct surveillances, they keep and searches, they keep logs. The surveillance is what happened at this time. Where'd that person go? Who did he meet with? So you have surveillance logs that you could use to do case notes. And then, of course, during a search, you have your notes from the search. You do a quick schematic of what the place looked like. You go in and you take photos before you begin the search. You have a log of the evidence that you've collected and, where it came from. And then at the very end, you have, you take photos of how you left the place. And so those are some of the case notes that you could use in your story if that's how you're trying to show what an agent does every day. Anybody else, any thoughts on that? Anything I missed that you could use?
Jerry, let me just go back to my comments earlier about the need for reality. I was once on the Larry King show, trying to explain the reality of my work that I was doing, studying satanic ritual abuse and how most of its activity simply was not going on. What I learned many years later is that program was watched by the man who developed the X-Files. And he decided that although I was saying what I did on the program, he decided that there would be a special unit within the FBI who would have to be specially trained to investigate these more kind of bizarre cases. And that turned into the X-Files, which again is one of the most ridiculous programs. If you enjoy it as escapist fiction, that's fine, but it has no basis in reality, at least in my 30 years.
I have to say, I'm laughing. I totally respect your Ken, but I think for most of the people that are here, they understand what you're saying and agree with a lot of it. But I do think that they want to write their stories. And I'm saying this in a way because, and I haven't told anybody about this, but, I was hoping that Ray Morrow would come, but I am working, I do have an option, and I am working with a producer, a pitch for a TV show. And, I'm sitting there talking to him about what we're doing. And, as we're going through and we're pulling the stories together. And of course, he has thoughts that just would never happen. And then I'll tell him how it really happens. And then we do a creative compromise. We do a creative compromise because it has to be a story that I can live with and that I'm not going to, as for those who've read my book, take my shoe off and throw it at the TV set for my own TV show. But that's the great thing about fiction, is that it takes you someplace that you've never been before and to a whole new world. But again, I'd want to have people have a foundation. And there were some things that I'm sure that the writer of the X-Files, because, it's entertaining, but there are some things every now and then, they had the real FBI case file folder and they just had elements of things that were accurate that they kind of back in. And I do want to say, that, I appreciated that.
I don't have any major problem with that. But again, I'm influenced by the fact that over the years, I've been asked by dozens and dozens and dozens of primarily females attending my presentation who came up to me and told me that they want to be like Clarice Starling from Silence of the Lambs. And you say to yourself, is that your knowledge of the FBI? That's why I appreciate so much the work that you're doing to try to communicate a certain reality about the FBI. But again, the problem is people watch fiction and for some reason, but they have a need to believe it. I don't know what it is, but want to believe that this is reality instead of fiction. But that's the way the world is, and nothing I can do to change it.
Yeah, and that's one of the first things that I say in, again, my book, is that what most people know about the FBI, they get from books, TV, and movies. And most of what they're reading is inaccurate. So I totally agree with you. Did Ray ever show up? Ray?
Laura? Jerry, I emailed him offline, and he is stuck in a work meeting. So he sent his apologies.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, that's too bad. I hope he won't mind me sharing with you that he also, I have producers like Mr. Brooks and people who are on, who do TV shows and books and stuff about the FBI who listen to the podcast. Some of the people who work for the new CBS show, FBI, listen to the podcast. I've heard from them, and they follow me on Twitter. And every now and then, I would say 5 or 6 times, I've been contacted by people who are interested in turning somebody's episode into a TV show or another podcast, a long-term serial podcast. And so that's happened with Ray. And we're actually working with the same producers. Who knows? We'll see what happens. Let's get some more questions answered here. And I hope that was good for you, Renee, that my answer to your question. Renee's, her camera's not on, so I can't see her nod her head, but she can write in if we miss something. All right. So William says, a lot of movies have local police not wanting the FBI involved. Is this accurate? And for the purpose of my novel, how do I deal with a sheriff who doesn't want the FBI there? Oh, boy. Again, Ken is laughing. I know you're going to have a lot to say. This is another one. I mean, Ken talked about the Silence of the Lambs, being totally inaccurate. And this cliche is one of the ones that makes me so angry also. The FBI and almost every FBI office, and Kevin Rust, who was in the 1-man and the 2-man RA. I definitely want you to weigh in on this. But, that is a cliche that started in movies that is totally inaccurate. I mean, the FBI has their jurisdiction. You have your local police, you have your state police, and there are many cases that, the jurisdictions cross and we work together. Especially today with the FBI and their task force concepts, which started way back in the 1980s, we actually have police officers. We actually have state troopers. We actually have, people from IRS working with us in our office. That's where they come every day. They, have assigned a bureau car, and, they get paid through the bureau because they're especially on the Joint Terrorism Task Force. That is just so old school. In most situations, the FBI knows these people. We're working with, it's not like the FBI kind of shows up and never been to this small town. They're providing training programs. They're, working hand in hand with the different, like I can speak for Philadelphia. With Philadelphia, you have the FBI and the Philadelphia Police Department working on many, many cases together. And it's just a concept that just burns me up because, the FBI definitely realizes that cooperation with and working with the different organizations, is crucial to what we do. And I think what happens is that cliche gets out there, and there may be a beat cop or an officer who comes across an FBI agent, and now the agent has to kind of get past that cliche and have extra work to do because, that's how they believe that the FBI works. And of course, you're going to always have, maybe 1 or 2 agents who kind of have that kind of attitude, but, absolutely not. Kevin, would you like to, since you were in a 1 or 2-man RA and had to depend and rely on your local law enforcement counterparts, would you like to weigh in on that?
Sure. So there's really three things, right? There's one type of crime. Well, there's really one type of crime that's really a federal crime, mainly. So counterterrorism. Well, although locals help a lot on that. I'm trying to think of an example that some of the other people could. But there's type that's mainly prosecuted federally. Then there's a crime that's joint. Bank robberies is a good example where it's a state crime and a federal crime. And then there's the crimes that are local. And I don't know how many times in my RA I would have somebody come in or call me up and say, my brother was murdered in this small county in Mississippi, and they're doing a terrible job of the investigation. Can you please help? And it was, you just tell them, no, I'm sorry, I can't, because murder, generally, unless there's some extenuating circumstance, isn't a federal crime. So I'm not allowed to go help investigate a murder. Even if the sheriff asks me and says, hey, I'd like you to come help me with this murder, I got to say, no, I can't do it. There's no federal jurisdiction. But, like if it's a bank robbery, then you're kind of working it together, and then you decide, but very rarely have I had a sheriff. I've had some sheriffs that kind of resented, or sheriffs or police departments that resented us getting involved because they felt like they could handle it on their own. But it's kind of hard to tell us to go away. They can, bigger cities, they can do that. But it's always kind of like you said, Jerry, it's kind of, we know the people, we work out these things. It's always kind of a give and take on how much and who does what, and then accepting a task force situation.
Anybody else have anything they want to say?
Yeah, Jerry, I'd like to add that I was a street agent for 10 years and did the work of a regular FBI agent. But for the last 20 years, I was in the FBI. I was in essentially the behavioral science unit. And one of the great inaccuracies of all the programs about the behavioral science unit is the operational work we did was not really investigation, because most of them were not federal violations, as Kevin just explained. But I was able to consult on any case I wanted to. That's the difference between investigation and consultation. So during those 20 years, I consulted on hundreds and hundreds of cases involving the sexual victimization of children.
But they came to you. They wanted you.
Yeah, they wanted me.
Yeah. You didn't just barge in.
Yeah, they wanted my advice and guidance, and I was able to do that because it was not an investigation. I didn't jump in a helicopter and run out and do the investigation. The other thing I'd like to throw in, because from the time I was a first agent in 1970, I was involved in the FBI's field police training program. And that's another valuable resource that the FBI provides to local law enforcement. I found out that many cops, the first FBI agent they ever met was at a police school that he was the instructor at. And so a lot of their ideas were formed by that rather than working with the FBI in investigation, which would more likely come later in their career.
And talking about that, we do also have the National Academy, which is an international, I don't want to call it a training program because it's so much more than that, but it's an opportunity for leaders and law enforcement to come to the FBI to share ideas, to talk about best practices, and to receive some training. And this is international. And it's definitely a feather in the cap of anybody in leadership in any local law enforcement agency to be able to apply and be accepted to the FBI National Academy, which is also at the FBI Academy. And it's also a way for us to almost have like an ambassadorship where we are talking, with local police, heads of local police departments, and letting them know, as the FBI little quote that we used to say, we're here to help, that we're reaching out. And so again, in most situations, when the FBI would come into a story, and again, we're talking fiction, in most situations, the sheriff already knows the FBI, has already had opportunities to meet with the FBI, to be involved or at least speak with the FBI. It's very seldom, I would imagine, that you're just going to, again, a police officer or patrol officer might be different, but a sheriff would probably already have been associated, had some type of association with the FBI at that point. I would think it would be a responsibility of the FBI special agent in charge or assistant special agent in charge to go out and introduce themselves and meet with the sheriff. And so that definitely is a cliche from many, many years ago that the FBI can roll into town and try to take over a case. And many times it is, in stories and TV shows about a murder. And, you're watching the show saying like, why is the FBI even there in this local murder investigation? How did we get involved in that? And basically it's because it's fiction. Anybody else want to weigh in on that?
I was in a 2-man RA in Auburn, California for 6 years. And we covered 5 counties in California, which meant we covered 5 police departments and 5 sheriff's departments. We had tremendous liaison with the sheriff and with the chiefs of police. They helped us. We helped them. We were very successful, and we had a double caseload in Auburn. And the supervisors in Sacramento said, if you don't want that job, come back to Sacramento and work 25 cases. But we've got 10 guys that want to come up there and take over. So we covered Lake Tahoe, Marysville, Yuba City, Grass Valley, Nevada City, all these little small towns. Wonderful work. Wonderful work.
Just going to chime in real quick. The agent who held a spot on a sexual assault felony enforcement task force, so it was actually the FBI sat over at the PD, reverse of having, the police and the locals sit at the FBI. So I was assigned, but the agent before me was one of those who tainted the reputation of the Bureau, where he would always try to take all the cases and jump in front of the camera if he could, and those kinds of things, sort of getting the FBI the credit all the time. So when I took over for him, I had to really fight tooth and nail to prove that I was not that agent. I was someone else. I was going to do things differently. I was going to be a team player. I was going to show up when you asked. I was going to do whatever you needed and have a real collaborative effort versus a holding, the Bureau a little bit higher than anyone else. So I did have to fight, I'd say 6 to 8 months to really find my place and earn the trust and the respect, get that rapport going and be part of the team. And after that, it was amazing.
I think that's something that comes up a lot in people's stories. Local police departments and state police departments are not subordinate to the FBI. There is no hierarchy, and it's the, FBI and then the local, we all have our work to do and we all have our jurisdictions. But, if there was some type of a local crime scene and as an FBI agent, I walked in, people would stop me behind the yellow tape. Who are you? What do you want? What are you doing here? There's no flashing a badge and just parading through. That's just not the case. Not the case at all. I think what you're saying, Stacey, is what I said is that there might be an individual agent who is a-hole, but he's probably an a-hole to the FBI agents that he works with just as much as he is with the locals. Melissa was asking me in the chat how I developed my fictional characters for my novel. What came first, the storyline or the characters? And so for the 2 books that I've already written and the one that I'm writing now are all based on true stories in Philadelphia. I would have loved to have, I like writing nonfiction too now that I've done that, but it's restrictive and you don't get to use your imagination and creativity as much in writing nonfiction as fiction. So I took stories that really happened. There really was an FBI investigation of corruption in the strip club industry, which is my first novel. And it was really investigated by 2 female FBI agents. And so I took that concept of that story and then there's a famous quote by Joseph Wambaugh, who's considered the grandfather of police procedurals. He's the man. And he says that a good crime story is not about how a cop works on cases. It's about how these cases work on the cop. And looking at that corruption case in the strip club industry, I had to create a character where working that case was going to bring up or create issues from her painful past. And so that's how that was done. I found the story first in real life, and then I created characters that would be able to react and have crisis and trauma and storylines that would affect them as they work the case. In Greedy Givers, it was actually one of my cases, $350 million Ponzi scheme that I worked. I kind of did that. So the story concept is from true life. I always wondered why the subject in the case, John Bennett, why he did what he did, because it was a charity Ponzi scheme. He was taking money from different charities and, creating this powerful Ponzi scheme. And he did take money. He took about 8 million of the 350 million, but a lot of it, he was actually taking money and giving it to nonprofits. And it was always like, why did you do this? And we all know it's because he got up on the power. But I wrote that fiction book as an answer to my own question of, how did this happen? And in the book that I'm writing now, and for those of you in the Philadelphia or in the Northeast area, you know that a couple of years ago, during 2-year period, not only did Philadelphia's district attorney get arrested and investigated for corruption, but so did their congressman. The book that I'm writing now is I created one character out of that. It's a district attorney, but using concepts from both of those real life cases in order to do that novel. And that's how I do it. I love looking at true cases and then fictionalizing them, making some creative compromises when I have to, but really using the foundation of my knowledge and expertise as an FBI agent to, flesh out the story. If an FBI is murdered, is that a state crime? It's both. Murder is always a state crime, but it also is a federal crime because the murder of a federal law enforcement officer is also part of a federal jurisdiction. And so that's an example of where both the FBI and the locals would have to be working together. And that's unfortunately happened. We've had, agents who have been killed in the line of duty. Of course, the FBI is going to investigate that case, but it still is a local murder. And so we would work those things together. And you have to understand the FBI doesn't have its own morgue. It doesn't have its, own coroner. It doesn't have some of those local facilities to immediately go in. We would probably lead the crime scene, but we would be working very closely with the locals on that particular case. Anybody want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, and crimes on Indian reservations, we handle murder cases on Indian reservations.
Yeah. I did an episode with an agent who worked crimes in Indian country, and it was very fascinating to listen to him talk about some of those things that I think of and that we think of the FBI agent doesn't do. But when you're working as an FBI agent in Indian country, and that's what they call it, I'm not being politically incorrect. When they have an agent working on crimes in Indian country, they are working some of the same cases in some of the same ways that a local police officer would work. So that's a fascinating episode if you have a chance to listen to it. And again, I can't remember the name of the agent. I'll remember it as soon as we get off. But if you just put in the search engine, there's a little search glass at the very top of my website. And if you just put in Indian country, that episode would come up. And I think that would be very helpful for anybody writing that type of story. Let's see. Oh, there's somebody here that is Anwar, that was a general in the Lebanese police department, and that he attended the FBI National Academy in 1980. So great. Nice to have you here. Okay. So Phil has a question. His novel involves an agent-involved shooting. What happens when that type of incident occurs? Well, one of the first things that would happen is that the FBI would immediately dispatch a shooting review team. And this shooting review team is made up of supervisors and senior managers who would come from headquarters in different offices and would be deployed to the shooting site. And this usually occurs not just when somebody has been shot, but when a weapon that has been discharged in the line of duty. And so they'll go and they'll, again, in cooperation with the locals, because if there's a shooting, that's under their jurisdiction too. But in collaboration with the locals, that shooting review team would interview all the people that are participating, and their purpose is to make sure that FBI policies and procedures were followed, and that if there were any lessons to be learned and things that need to be changed that were created from this particular shooting incident. So definitely the shooting review team would be deployed. Anybody else with any thoughts on that? Anybody?
Yeah, I was on the SWAT team in San Francisco, and we had an AD during a room clear of a big industrial building. And it wasn't as big of a team that came, but like you said, because the weapon was still discharged, even an AD. And then, of course, the SWAT team did our own after action review, an AAR on, was that a training? Was that a malfunction? Was that just you had your finger on the trigger when you shouldn't have? The agent had switched his long gun from his right shoulder to his left to move around a corner. And as he did that, switching hands, he put his finger into the trigger guard and then ultimately onto the trigger. Luckily, the weapon was pointed down into this, big box of nothing, essentially. So the projectile didn't go anywhere. But it was a big deal, and it was a big deal for us as an after-action review with the SWAT team to say, let's not have that happen again.
An excellent episode for anybody looking at how the FBI handles shooting incidents would be the one that I did. It's called Shootout on Broad Street, or Broad Street Shootout. And it was about two, Evan Simon's nodding his head. I think he remembers that, but it was two agents. It was an agent and his supervisor on the interview talking about a shootout that they were involved in, where the agent was actually shot in the chin. And it's an exciting episode because the supervisor, I'm going to give you a little bit of this, but when the supervisor first sees that the agent's been shot, he thinks it was like a graze wound, and he's kind of like, okay, you're okay. Let's just get this scene under control. And the next thing he knows, he goes to the hospital to check on the agent, and he's in intensive care. And that it had actually been, the shot had gone through from one side to the other. And, he had the possibility of bleeding to death. And so just listening to their emotions. And, one of the things I want to say about the podcast is that people ask me all the time, how come I'm not videoing the podcast? Why it's just audio? And I find that the agents are more comfortable with telling their stories and more introspective in telling their stories when it's just audio. When you're kind of sitting back, especially if you have the opportunity to look over notes and things that you have, instead of having to be so careful about how you're looking and be so, self-conscious about, what you're saying, that when it's just audio and you're just sitting there able to tell your story, they're much more comfortable. And when you're listening to that particular episode and, the agent talking about being shot and realizing, that he's bleeding and the blood is just coming out. And when he says the only thing he thought about was his children, it is, wow. The other episode that you want to listen to when you want to learn more about agent being involved in incident report, of course, is the episode I did on the Miami shootout. Again, somebody help me. I'm having a memory lapse. Who was the case agent?
Ed Morales.
Yes, Ed Morales. When he is talking about that shootout and, what he was going through, I mean, you really feel that you are there, and he's talking about what it's like to be shot at and to be shooting back in the aftermath of almost dying. I did have two agents. One of them, Jerry Duff, who was in my training class that, I knew well, that even my sister had the opportunity to meet and go out to drinks with. They were killed in that particular incident. So those are two episodes that you really need to listen to if you're writing a story that has agents being involved in the shootout. And I think that would give you some authenticity to your story to use some of the things that you learned by listening to that episode. Thanks, Mike. Yeah, Mike put in here that the episode was 189 with retired agent Michael Harrington. And I'm repeating that because I do want to make sure that it gets on the audio. Yeah, episode 189 with retired agent Michael Harrigan was the episode that I did for Crimes on an Indian Reservation, which was, again, very fascinating. Janine did find that good. Thank you. And the Broad Street Shootout episode was episode 161. So if you're looking about how to handle FBI shooting incidents in your story, Broad Street Shootout episode 161, and the Miami Shootout was a 2-part episode with Ed Morales, and that was episodes 118 and 119. All right, so that's everything I have in the chat. And so if you have more questions, please let me know.
Jerry, just want to add something that
please do.
I've dealt with for most of my career, and even since I retired, particularly dealing with sexual victimization of children, which is an extremely emotional topic for so many people, as you discussed with Jim Kyle last night on the podcast. But one of the problems you have, it makes for good storytelling. It certainly is compelling to people to watch it and see the effect on the agent and so on and the investigator. But also the thing that I dealt with is how it can affect the objectivity of an agent or any investigator when you get too emotionally involved in a case. And as I looked at this issue of satanic ritual abuse that so many people believed in, one of the fundamental questions I asked myself is, if this isn't going on, why are there so many highly educated, intelligent people who believe that it is? And a lot of it, not all of it, but a certain amount of it is because of an emotional need to validate children and to believe children and all that stuff. So sometimes it's good storytelling, but sometimes it can affect the objectivity of the agent involved in the case. And again, as you said earlier, you have to strike a balance between the two.
That's an excellent point. And that's one of the first chapters that I talk about is working, those type of cases. And again, we've got a lot of episodes, agents in the field talking about when they work those type of cases. And if somebody could look this up for me, it would include the episode with Dan Kraft, who actually interviewed Jeffrey Dahmer 4 times. He worked those type of cases with serial killers and I guess it was Wisconsin. Is that where Jeffrey Dahmer was? And then, of course, the Jeff Reineck episodes, the 2 episodes I did with Jeff Reineck about working child predator cases. And that was such a powerful episode, because part 2 of the episode, he talks about how much this affected him working these type of cases, that he actually attempted to commit suicide 2 times. And, didn't know he was going to talk about that. And I was very, concerned that I was asking the right questions and saying the right things in order to continue that conversation. And I ended up actually speaking with his wife, who he leaned on a lot because he was having all this difficulty processing some of the things that he had seen when he was working, these type of cases. He was the case agent for the Yosemite murders that occurred in Yosemite in California. And so that's another episode that people who are writing about agents working serial killers, and, we're trying to stop them from talking about a profiler in the behavioral analysis unit going out to investigate, and actually let them know that, yes, there are agents working, again, with local police departments because it's murder. The FBI, in my book, I have a chapter on this and letting you know how the FBI gets involved in these cases. And most of the time they're at the invitation and the request of the locals for us to come in. And those episodes would be great episodes for you to look at if you are interested in writing, stories that are based on a good foundation. I know you're going to, use your imagination. That's why you're fiction writers. But if you want to have a foundation about what really happens, then the Dan Kraft episode and the episode with Jeff Reinick would be two that you definitely want to listen to.
Hey, Jerry. Episode 132 is the episode with Dan Kraft with Jeffrey Dahmer. And then 126 and 127 are the episodes with Jeff Reinick.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. Stacey, this is a good question that you can answer. This is one that came in on email. What are the reasons, and Melissa's gone, but what are the reasons that agents resign from the Bureau besides the mandatory retirement at age 57 or for reasons of health? So I'll start out, but then I'll let you tell your story. So agents resigning from the FBI before not going until retirement is really low. I think somebody said we had like a less than 1% attrition rate. So most people who join the FBI stay until they can retire. Now, mandatory retirement is 57, but I will say that most agents leave around 51 to 52 right when they're eligible. There's two reasons. One, because they're tired. They've been working hard and, they know it's time to move on. But the other reason is marketability. They want to make sure that they get out there and pick up that post FBI job before they're quote unquote too old, because ageism, does occur. And they want to make sure when you can retire between, you have to retire at 57, you can retire at 50, but it's not your full retirement pay. It used to be, but it's not anymore. And so agents still need another job. And so they usually leave, in their early 50s because, they're trying to get that post-retirement job. So most agents don't resign early. But Stacey, if you'd like to tell them your story, you did leave after 10 years.
Yeah, so for me, it was sort of a culmination of working crimes against children. And I didn't have kids at the time. But once I did have my own children, I felt like I needed to be their protector. My circle of trust was pretty small. But after realizing what, like I said, humanity will do to the smallest and the most vulnerable of victims, I really tightened that circle of trust. And I felt like I needed to be the one raising my daughters and protecting them. And so I've gone on to, I'm writing, but I teach empowered mindset and self-defense classes to young girls, young women, adult women, because I was so much in that intervention. I would get a case and then find other victims, and they had already been victimized. So I really felt this pull to offer preventative sort of services based on my experiences and talking to pedophiles and interviewing them and talking to victims and how did they get pulled into these situations. So I understood both of those complex levels, and I'm able to sort of put that out there to hopefully prevent some of this victimization, or just making different choices based on my experience. And, a woman teaching girls, it has a different flavor as well. I'm not a big man who's like, well, just do this, this, and this on the street and you'll be fine. I use my defensive tactics that I learned in the Bureau, and I'm able to apply that to a 10-year-old girl being able to use her voice and defend herself, but also have that education behind it of what can I do differently? What choices can I make to keep myself safer? So that's kind of a long version, but yeah, it was to protect my girls. Really, that's the bottom line.
Yeah, that's definitely a great reason to resign. And I think it's a challenge that many agents have to say, mostly the female agents, but definitely the male agents who are divorced or who have spouses with a very demanding job, childcare, and who's going to take care of your kids, because your supervisor doesn't necessarily care that, when something happens that you need to get home. They're expecting you as an agent to show up for, those early morning arrests and things like that, and make arrangements. Another reason, I guess, that a lot of agents, not a lot, because there isn't a lot of agents that leave. And whenever you find somebody that left early, you're like, oh, why'd you leave early? But a lot of it has to do with the transfer policy also. It's a little bit better now. My understanding is that when you join the FBI, that you have a good chance of getting at least close to where you would like to be. You're never going to go back to where you came in from unless it's a big city. Like if you're coming from New York, you have a really good chance of them reassigning you back to New York. Same thing for LA and possibly even Chicago and DC. But, if you're coming in from a small area, the chances are that you're not going to be relocated anywhere near your home. And so a lot of agents who resign because they need to or want to be closer to family. Another reason would be because of career opportunities. I have a very good friend of mine, Tony Joseph, that I worked with in Philly. He was an attorney, and working as an agent with the U.S. Attorney's Office, he realized that he'd rather be an assistant U.S. attorney. And so he actually applied for a job as a U.S. assistant attorney back in Birmingham, Alabama, where he was from. And he quit the bureau and became an assistant United States attorney until he gathered all the knowledge about what we worked. And then, of course, he became a defense attorney and made big bucks. Any other reasons that you could think of why agents resign before?
Some agents, they weren't even agents in the academy. Once after orders night, where you open up an envelope and say, I hope I'm going to San Francisco, but I'm actually gonna go to, and you open it up and it says New York. And I think four prospective agents in my class resigned after orders night because they were hoping they would get lucky, and they didn't, and they weren't prepared. Even though we all signed those things saying that we would move wherever the needs of the Bureau come first. But several left even the academy because they weren't prepared to make that move.
And that's terrible. The Bureau puts so much money into the recruitment, trying to make sure they're finding the very best people. And one of the things that they stress is the transfer policy. And they actually have a spousal interview, a partner interview, where if you are either married or you have a significant partner or significant other, they have you bring that person in before you get your letter of appointment to make sure that person understands that although there's this possibility and that possibility, an agent must be willing to be transferred anywhere in the United States. And then we have 56 field offices, but that doesn't mean you could end up in a 1 or 2 man resident agency like Kevin did, in the middle of nowhere. And so when they talk about joining the FBI and accepting the transfer policy, they're pretty serious. Ken, you had something?
Yeah, Jerry, I'm just going to say, I was born and raised in New York City, and I was somewhat surprised and I went through new agent training in 1970, a long time ago, but the number of agents in my class who indicated that if they got sent to New York, they were going to resign. And at that time, about 10% of all FBI agents were in New York City. They had over 1,000 agents. And why would you join an organization where you had a 10% chance of going someplace that if they sent you there, you were just going to resign? The only other one I would add is just one anecdotal story of an agent that I became very close to. It was a female agent, happened to be, could have been a male, who resigned near the end because she came to the realization that she thought she would be unable to shoot somebody. And so that was just a realization that she came to and decided that therefore being an FBI agent was not for her. And I had great respect for her that she came to that realization early.
Yeah, I do too. Anybody else?
If I could jump in to just to follow up on something Stacy said. We actually had somebody in our academy class that resigned 3 days after we did the entry on duty on Sunday night because he missed his wife and kids so much. Which, I think family is important, but you should have worked that out ahead of time. I remember, again, I think family is so important, but I really was angry about that because he cheated somebody out of an opportunity to go to the FBI Academy. And like you said, his spouse would have gone in for an interview. She would have understood. And I think when I went through the academy, it was only 14 weeks. Not saying that's a short period of time, but yet, they should have worked that out ahead of time. But also one other thing is I've had a handful of people leave for just they've gotten this fantastic job opportunity that was too good to pass up. Again, it's just a handful of people. Now, some of those people I've talked to, a year or two later, and those opportunities were still there. But I've known a couple of those people that was like a kind of a flash, and they weren't in those positions anymore and deeply regretted leaving the Bureau. But it was too late to go back because, as you know, once you leave, if you come back within a year, you don't have to go back to Quantico again. I believe it's a year. Past that, and, they were not interested in returning to Quantico again.
Yeah, I knew an agent who quit because of a real estate opportunity in Atlantic City. And I thought, what? And he left. And maybe 6 or 7 months out, he realized that he had made a mistake and he was able to get back in and he didn't have to go through the academy. But you have the famous agent, Joe Pistone. Joe Pistone is Donnie Brasco. And, they were going to be making the movie and everything. He was writing a book. And I think the Bureau was giving him some, and I've interviewed him on the podcast too. So I think he's told the story, but he left. And then once he left, he realized he wanted to come back, and he came back after that time period. And here you are, somebody who has probably one of the most famous FBI agents having to go back through the FBI Academy again, but he didn't.
Jerry, here's a story from 1970 in the old Hoover days. I had a guy in my new agent class, as was just described, resigned after 3 days when they told him he couldn't wear a blue shirt. He just
What?
He couldn't wear a blue shirt. He wasn't going to stay in the FBI, and he left.
You can wear blue shirts now, but back then it was a white shirt, definitely a white shirt.
Well, Jerry, I was thinking maybe new agents, or before you even get into the academy, maybe they should read your book.
Yes.
Right, to dispel some of those myths. Because I was thinking when Ken and Michael were talking that we had an agent after the firearms portion watching some of the things that we had to watch to make it a reality. He also said, I don't think I can carry a gun. I didn't realize I would be charged with carrying a weapon, and he left. Maybe had he read your book and understood some things beforehand, he wouldn't have applied or gotten that far in the process.
Yes, read the book.
That's what I was saying earlier about people telling me they want to be Clarice Starling. I said, if all the study you've done about being an FBI agent, you learn from watching one goofy movie, you just haven't done your work. You need to know a lot more. That can be a starting point. I have to admit that I became interested with Inspector Erskine, Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. from the old FBI story. That piqued my interest. But then you proceed from that point to learn more about the reality of the job.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what I did the first season of the CBS FBI show. I blogged all 22, 23 episodes, and it was fun. I was watching the show, and then I would say, what they got right, what they got wrong, and where they made creative compromises. I haven't done it since. The show is excellent when it comes to encouraging other people to know more about the FBI. And encouraging a whole new generation of kids to want to be agents. It's the way that you watched the FBI show way back then. So, it's doing a great job, but there are so many things about it that just aren't reality. But I'm sure people who are watching that show think they know all about the FBI because, they're dedicated fans and loyal fans of the CBS FBI show. But the FBI right now, it seems to be exploding with TV shows and plot lines and movies, and it's just amazing. If you look at the invitation, I gave you a list of TV shows and movies that feature the FBI. Now, there's lots of movies where the FBI walks through, but these are ones that really feature and focus on the FBI, and it's just amazing. And CBS has a whole franchise now Now they have the CBS FBI, they have the CBS Most Wanted, and they now have the CBS unscripted show FBI Declassified. And so it's like, wow, hopefully all those people will start buying my books and listening to the podcast. One of the questions that I was sent in was about that. How much of a role does the FBI play in the TV shows and the movies that are out there about them? I know that headquarters has a public affairs office, and as the media rep in Philadelphia, I work with them very closely. But they're in headquarters, and they offer education to all of the major movies and TV shows, giving them the opportunity to learn and to get some of those things authentic and right in their shows. Of course, they have absolutely no obligation to do so, but there is that opportunity. I know that I've talked to a number of people who've reached out to me who tried to get information or get questions answered by the public affairs, but you can imagine that they're inundated with people who are interested in asking questions about, the FBI and how things work. And so really a lot of their time is dedicated to major productions who are going to reach more people when they see their shows and read their books and TV shows and things like that. Yes, the FBI makes themselves available to answer those questions and give that information. Of course, they have a wonderful website. Kind of hard to find things on the website, but the information is there. But there is absolutely no obligation to use that information, that valid, factual information, in writing stories about the FBI. And the FBI has really no control over, how that perception is put out there. All right, let's see. I think I have maybe one more question that was sent in. I think I've answered all of the questions. Here's a question. A baby is kidnapped from the hospital. Where would the FBI set up its command center? I read in the child abduction response plan that it would be somewhere away from the crime scene. If the hospital calls 911 and the police come, I assume they cordon off the crime scene and do some preliminary investigation. When would they call the FBI and when would they work together? Would the FBI interview parents at their home? And do they have an agent at the parents' home for some time period? Would the parents attempt to call an attorney to protect their rights? Oh, that's a lot of questions. Baby kidnapped from a hospital. Again, this would be a local matter that we would hope they would contact the FBI sooner than later. If there is a thought that there is a kidnapping, of course, the premise is the possibility of that child being taken across state lines. If the FBI was introduced into the case much later, when it was stale, there would be a lot of missed opportunities. And again, that's all about those relationships that we talk about, where the FBI already knows and is already involved and already talking to their local police. And so hopefully the FBI would be pulled in early to work in collaboration with the local police department. As far as a command center, there'd be no reason to, the hospital is a crime scene, but there'd be no reason to have a command center there. If it's a true kidnapping where you think there's going to be a ransom, maybe they would have agents at the parent's home. But in all reality, and of course I'm going to let Ken, this is his area of expertise, but in all reality, a kidnapping when it comes to a child is really an abduction. And the investigation is, a matter of time, of trying to assess who took that child and to get that child back as soon as possible. Any parents in that situation who would automatically contact an attorney would go at the very top of the suspect list. So, Ken, this is your area.
Yeah, it's an interesting area. It came to be commonly known and still is known as infant abduction, although that's not necessarily the best term because some children who fit into this category are a little bit older than infants. But a common child abducted this way is an infant abduction, and it really has to do with the motivation of it. But what's really interesting about it is that although this is a horrible crime, it's relatively rare. We estimated about 115 a year, and that's dropped down since security has gotten better at hospitals. So when we did our research in this area, we didn't look at a random sample of cases. We looked at almost every known case. So it's hardly many serious crime problems where you can look at the entire population. So we learned a great deal about the motivation and how these particular types of offenders operate. They're primarily women, but sometimes they have a male accomplice. So we learned a lot about it. And that information then can be incorporated into the investigative response, would hopefully be by frontline FBI agents, as well as consulting with the behavioral science unit and developing some good investigative strategies. And fortunately, most of these children are recovered relatively unharmed, because the good news about these cases is the abductor is highly unlikely to severely injure the child, but the parents obviously are devastated. So it's an area where all this kind of comes together, the research, the case consultation, and the investigation. And I think the FBI has been able to play a significant role in these kind of cases, also working with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children.
One episode that I did about a child abduction from a hospital is Ed Hino. I don't know the episode, but I'm sure somebody will help me out. But yeah, and it was one of those cases where a child was stolen from the hospital from a woman who wanted a child. And the FBI was able to find the child. It was an exciting case because the woman who abducted the child disguised herself as a nurse and abducted the child. It was her daughter who lived in Las Vegas. This occurred in the Philadelphia area. Her daughter who lived in Las Vegas, who called the FBI. Where did her mother get this child from? It was amazing.
That turns out to be one of the most common ways these cases are solved, is when somebody realizes somebody has a baby and doesn't understand why. Another interesting, sad twist is when the hospitals began to increase their security, they almost stopped this crime from occurring in hospitals and displaced it to homes, where people would have balloons on their mailbox, announcing the birth of their baby, and those kind of things. And what we discovered is the level of violence went up considerably when the attempt to take the child was from a home where you don't have a larger selection. Many of these people would go in the hospital, be deterred, and they would just leave. But when you enter a home, you get in a confrontation, and that's where some people were severely injured and even murdered. And in some cases, some of these people were so disturbed that they wound up taking the baby while it was still in the womb. So it's a complicated, horrible thing. So I'm not implying that there's never any violence, but it's a case in which most of these children are abducted and that the individual wants a baby and so is less likely to severely harm it. But most of the time, they haven't planned for anything beyond just having the baby and living happily ever after. And that's where friends and neighbors and loved ones notice that this woman has a baby seemingly for unexplained reasons, and they'll call in.
One of the cases that I did an episode on, other than the Ed Hino, which number I'm still trying to find out what episode that is, but Polly Klaas is another child abduction. It was a two-parter. I think it was 56 and 57, or 57 and 58, but it's a two-parter. And thanks, Janine, two-parter. And it was all about the abduction of a child from her home. So she wasn't a baby, but she was 12 years old. That's another one of those cases, again, where because it's just audio and the agent is able to, to think about what happened and take himself back, that case agent, ended up crying and bringing me to tears on the episode as he talked about how important it was for him to try to get this 12-year-old back before something happened to her. And of course, unfortunately, she was murdered.
The Polly Klaas case is more of the stereotypical child abduction that's more sexually motivated, a little bit different than these infant abductions, which have a distinct motivation to them. One of the things about that motivation, many times the media reports it as a woman who wanted a child, and she did want a child, but we didn't understand until we studied the cases the real reason that most of these women wanted a child and did this. Why didn't they just adopt one? And that is, they didn't want a child. They wanted their boyfriend's child. They wanted to be able to tell their significant other that this was his child. And it was usually to preserve a relationship with their boyfriend or husband or whoever this guy was. And that's why they wanted the baby. That's why I had one case where the child was 3 years old or 4 years old because the man had been in jail for 3 or 4 years. And she had to convince him that it was his baby. So obviously it had to have been born before he went to jail. So again, it's just a different variation in the case. But the Polly Klaas case is another good example of where the street agents, the local police, the behavioral science unit, the National Center all worked together jointly to try to solve the case, which was unfortunately not solved until after she was killed. but they identified the guy through a good description or drawing of the individual. It was much more lifelike than the typical kinds of things that were done.
Yeah, I think I have a copy of the drawing and his actual photo
Right.
in the show notes of that episode, so you can really see that. And I think an important thing to talk about also is in those type of cases, almost always they are prosecuted by the state. So the FBI provides all the resources, the agents are involved in the investigation, maybe even the primary part of the investigation, because we're able to go in different counties and different jurisdictions. But usually at the end, it is decided that it will be prosecuted by the state, and those agents participate at the state level and getting those convictions.
Yeah, and I participate in the consultation on the prosecution strategies and all those kind of things. But in that case, particularly because it turned out when they solved the case, she had never left the state, so we didn't have an FBI violation. And then when she was murdered, that's a local violation, and so on. And so that's typically what happens in those kinds of cases. If the child's murdered, it's going to be prosecuted as a local crime. The other thing is that many police departments just don't deal with a lot of murders. And so in a lot of these cases, or kidnappings, in a lot of these cases, the assistance that the FBI can provide in cooperation with state and local police is invaluable. These departments are relatively small and don't have the resources. And a lot of times, even though the FBI, and it's contrary to that stereotype that you talked about earlier, where the FBI is always trying to steal the case. In this case, what we're doing is providing them the resources they need so they can solve it and get credit for it. And you're kind of helping them with resources that they don't have.
Absolutely. That's an excellent point. I am looking over my notes here, the comments, the chat. Is there any other question that we haven't answered? Is there anything in there that I'm missing?
I think Simon asked about dealing with pedophiles. He wrote, would you say once a pedophile, always a pedophile? As like being straight or gay, he wrote, they are attracted to children.
Again, this is Ken's expertise. I'm not even going to touch this one, even though I hope you listened to the last episode.
I did. And that was tremendous. And particularly the most valuable thing about your discussion with Jim was the importance we were talking about earlier of whatever you believe inside. You've got to project the idea that you don't think this guy is evil scum and you just want to beat the hell out of him. That's not going to get any confession. But one of the problems, this is something that I've dealt with and written about, is the problem of imprecise definitions. And most Americans don't even know what a pedophile is. They pronounce it pedophile, but they don't take the kid to the pediatrician. But in any case, that in a lot of these cases, these individuals have this preference for children. But if you look at it, it's a psychiatric diagnosis. And the psychiatric diagnosis talks about recurrent, intense, sexually arousing fantasies, urges, and behaviors for prepubescent children. So anyone who's sexually victimizing a child who is not prepubescent, they are not technically or diagnostically pedophiles. But the most common definition of a pedophile is that it's a fancy word for a child molester. And most people, including the media, use the terms interchangeably. The other thing that Jim talked about is a typology that I developed that distinguishes between preferential offenders who would more likely be diagnosed as pedophiles and situational offenders. And therefore, I like to use the quote of a prosecutor who said, some child molesters can be treated, some child molesters can't be treated. The great problem and challenge is figuring out which is which. And so the idea that once a pedophile, always a pedophile, for the preferential offenders, that has some ring of truth to it. But for situational offenders, there may be treatment programs. And my attitude is very few of these guys are going to jail forever or going to be executed. So therefore, treatment and punishment are not mutually exclusive. So we need to think about both and evaluate the seriousness of the crime. But if somebody has, and you discussed it last night with Jim, is it a sexual preference? And that's a very controversial issue. Is attraction to children a sexual preference, or is it what psychiatry calls a paraphilia? And there's some debate about that, and I won't get into that. But again, some of these individuals have these urges, and it's very difficult to eradicate their desire and attraction to children. And so best thing they can do is just try to avoid ever being around children and so on. And sometimes they deserve to be sent to jail for a long time.
Thank you for that. So I think, unless somebody can think of a question that I haven't answered, is there any more? I think we're just about done. I want to thank you for your support of the FBI and definitely, your support of me. We never get political on FBI Retired Case File Review, but definitely what the FBI means and how the FBI goes forward is really kind of part of this election, I hate to say. And those people who have taken the time to really know who the FBI is and the cases that we work, I really appreciate. You're like ambassadors for us out there in the world who show their support and their faith in, as they like to say, your FBI. So unless anyone has any other questions, unless there's any other comments and questions, I'll stay on for a little bit more if anybody does. Otherwise, thank you so much for being here. And it's, again, fantastic. Good writing. Hope you have a great time writing your stories. And thanks again for coming.
And that's the end of the Zoom meetup. I'll notify you about future meetups in my monthly Reader Team email. In this episode's show notes, I'll list the names of the retired agents and former agents who attended the meetup, and their episodes, and the episodes mentioned when we were answering questions. I hope you enjoyed the episode and that you'll share it with your friends, family, and associates. If they're not sure how to listen to a podcast, have them read the post on my website, How to Listen to a Podcast. And don't forget to subscribe to FBI Retired Case File Review on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. I would also love it if you checked out the link for my books in your podcast app's description of this episode. My nonfiction books, FBI Myths and Misconceptions, a manual for armchair detectives, which goes through 20 cliches and misconceptions about the FBI in books, TV, and movies. And then there's the companion book, FBI Word Search Puzzles, Fun for Armchair Detectives. My FBI Philadelphia Corruption Squad crime series features flawed female FBI agent Carrie Wheeler in Pay to Play and Greedy Givers. All of my books are available wherever books are sold as ebooks, print books, and audiobooks. If you've already picked up copies of my books, please consider leaving a review. Reviews help readers find good books. Thank you for listening to the very end, and I hope you come back again for another episode of FBI Retired Case File Review with Jerry Williams. Thank you.